This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
What a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Hump Day, Wednesday edition of Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you. Sixers back in action tonight, and it looks like Tobias Harris will be available for your Philadelphia 76ers tonight. You can hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Tom McGinnis on the call. We'll get a full report from Kevin McCormick, our Sixers beat writer, coming up at 6:40 p.m. today. He is live at the Center. He'll join us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show live on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Of course, the text board is open as well at 609-403-0973 to get in on the conversation as well here on 97.3 ESPN. So we got a lot to get into, a little bit of time to get to it. We will get to the Sixers stuff a little bit as well, but I got to start with the Eagles stuff. So I wrote an article over at 973ESPN.com about Jalen Hurts, and I know there's a lot of people out there who have this thing about drafting a quarterback. And the conversation that Mike Gill had on the Sports Bash today really amplified, really accentuated the conversation about not drafting a quarterback. And it's less about it specifically being about Jalen Hurts as much as it is that you can't go through this draft and tell me that you don't want one of these other guys for this team. Patrick Surtain II, Kyle Pitts, Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Penei Sewell, any of these guys, they're all phenomenal players. They all have phenomenal talents, and you're literally going to pass on one of them because you really want a quarterback when you already have a quarterback? Think about that just for a hot minute. Just process that for a minute. You're going to pass up players who are potentially generational talents because you may or may not like Jalen Hurts. Now, this isn't me dissing on Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, because I think all four of them have a chance to be good NFL quarterbacks. Do I like some of them more than others? Absolutely. Do I like Justin Fields a lot more than the other three? Absolutely. Do I have concerns about Zach Wilson's injury history in college where he's injured not one but both shoulders in his career? Yes, I have concerns about that. Do I have concerns that Trey Lance is just too inexperienced coming to the NFL and maybe he needs to sit a year? Yes, I'm concerned about that. Do I think Mac Jones is potentially more of a system quarterback than he is a guy who elevates the players around him? Possibly. So why would I take one of those guys when I can have somebody like this, as Jeff Mosher said today on Football at 4?
He's a guy that is such a matchup nightmare. You can throw the ball to him 40 yards in the air. I'm not saying you can't, but he's more used to over the middle, 10, 15, 20 yards, and then using that explosion and athleticism to get yards after the catch. He's such a matchup nightmare that you wouldn't want to relegate him just to the X or just to the slot.
He is a matchup nightmare, is how they just described Kyle Pitts from Florida. So you're going to pass up on a matchup nightmare because you may or may not be sold on Jalen Hurts? I mean, that's just a weird way to think. And that's the problem with the world we live in today. As I stated on my article, and you can check out the full thing over at 973ESPN.com, the people who look at Zach Wilson and these other quarterbacks, and I know some of you out there are people who are listening to my voice right now who feel this way. When you look at these other quarterbacks, you forget that these guys all have flaws and that you're intimately knowledgeable of Jalen Hurts after basically 4 starts and 1 game played. People love to point to, the completion percentage. oh, they only won one game with him as a starter. But yet you conveniently forget how bad the offense was with Carson Wentz. You conveniently forget all the injuries on the offensive line. You conveniently forget how many times we came on the radio and complained about them not running the ball enough. And that Jalen Hurts a couple times was their leading rusher on the year. In certain games. We get so enamored, so obsessed, so focused on certain things that we forget the bigger picture. The bigger picture is this. If I am a person evaluating Jalen Hurts, I am not just focusing on a handful of things. You're not settling for Jalen Hurts. I know everybody loves the new car on the lot. You just got a car a year or two ago. You drive past a local automotive dealership, and you say, ooh, that car looks really nice. You know, right now, we're in the Matt Black Kia studios here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you. You know, you drive by Matt Black Kia in the Black Horse Bike in Egg Harbor Township. You look over, and you're like, ooh, that car looks really nice. Ooh, that car, man, I'd love to have that car. And you start thinking about it. You're processing it. You fantasize about what you don't have. Because what you do have, you know every flaw of it intimately. You don't know every flaw of the car on the lot intimately. You know the flaws of what you have intimately. Did you know that Jalen Hurts, his final year in college, was 6th in all of college football in completion percentage at 69.7. He was 2nd in college football in passer efficiency rating. Number 1 in college football in passing yards per attempt. But he's not the shiny new car. He's not the fancy new item. He isn't the hot, sexy thing walking down the lane. People act like Jalen Hurts can't play quarterback in the NFL. So you would rather pass up you would rather pass up on a phenomenal talent and draft a quarterback? Here's what a NFL scout told Jeff Mosher about Kyle Pitts and the rankings of the receivers.
I asked a couple of these scouts that I've spoken to the last few days how they would, if I asked them to rank the top 4 pass catchers, meaning I want to know where Pitts, his standing among the wide receivers, which you would take. And one guy gave me this ranking. He said Devontae Smith 1, Kyle Pitts 2, Jamar Chase 3, Jalen Waddle 4. So he actually has Pitts higher than Chase and Waddle, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Pitts ahead of Chase and Waddle. Now, listen, you can reorganize that top ranking all you want. You can swip and swap however you want. But I'll say this once, I'll say this twice, I'll say it 100 times. This Eagles franchise loves to give people opportunities who play quarterback. We've seen them all. Kevin Cobb, Michael Vick, Nick Foles twice, Carson Wentz. Why don't we give Jalen Hurts the same fair opportunity to play football? The obsession people have with fantasizing about what they don't have. And it's a societal problem, not just a sports problem. Everybody loves what they don't have. People jump on social media. They see somebody else's house. They see something that somebody else has, or maybe something that they would like to have, whatever platform it may be. You go on Instagram, you go on Twitter, you go on Facebook, you got that Snapchat, you got all these different platforms where you can see and absorb things that maybe you would not see and absorb in your daily life, and you fantasize about what you don't have. Because what you do have, you tend to look at it and you know all the flaws of it. You see what you do have and you're not thrilled with it. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's so many times that you think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, and then you get to the other side of the fence and you realize it was just the way the sun was shining on it that it looked greener. Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Still to come here. It's a Weinberg Wednesday. with longtime Eagles writer Dave Weinberg, also Hall of Fame boxing writer Dave Weinberg. I got to ask him as well, coming up, Clarissa Shields is headlining a all-women's pay-per-view boxing card. I got to ask about that because we got some history coming up later this week. So we'll get into the Eagles. We'll get into boxing with Dave Weinberg. Sixers back in action tonight versus the Jazz. 7 o'clock here on 97.3 ESPN. One in the East, one in the West. Go head-to-head. Rivers versus Quinn Snyder. Gobert versus Embiid. Mitchell versus Simmons. Looks like Tobias Harris is going to play. We'll get into all the details more with Kevin McCormick at 6:40 tonight. All that still to come right here on 97.3 ESPN FM, 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City. You can check out my full article about Jalen Hurts and the Eagles over at 97.3 ESPN.com. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show. Just follow 97.3 ESPN.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, it is a Wednesday edition of the show, and every Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN, we will get to your comments at 609-403-0973, and all of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter on 97.3 ESPN. But, of course, joining us as he does each and every week for a Weinberg Wednesday, Dave Weinberg, longtime Eagles coverage, also Hall of Fame boxing. We got a lot to get to with Dave Weinberg here on 97.3 ESPN. As all guests, he appears on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So I want to get to a couple different things with you, but I wanted to start with, there's so much chatter right now when it comes to the Eagles and who they should draft. I mean, we're basically about 7 weeks away from the draft, and it feels like that it's like an insatiable appetite for people. I got to ask you, though, listen, I've made my position clear. I feel like they need to draft a player, a blue chip talent. But, Dave, you've covered this team for a long time. You know the fan base as well as anybody. What is up with the obsession that people have with another quarterback? I don't understand it. I don't understand this obsession with just because it's new and shiny means I need to go out and get it.
No, I'm with you. I think we've talked about this before. There's absolutely no reason to take a quarterback at number 6. I know there's some guys that'll definitely go in the top 10, top 15, but the Eagles have so many holes to fill right now that, a quarterback is just the last thing they need. And I'm of the opinion that Jalen Hurts, I think he deserves the opportunity to win that job. I mean, let him play. Let him have a training camp. Let him have a preseason. Let him have an off season, and see what we can do. See what he can do to develop, and just see how he plays next year. And then if you find out he's not the guy, then maybe go after another guy in 2022. But right now, I think that's a mistake to take a quarterback that high.
Yeah, to me, and listen, people can have their opinions about which guy they want in the draft, and I think we all can find a guy. To me, I just feel like you got the 6th overall pick. And maybe, Dave, you have a preference. I know you and I both like Patrick Surtain, but even if you go offense, I mean, Jamar Chase, Kyle Pitts, Devonta Smith, Penei Sewell drops to you. Do you let that guy go by? I feel like this is a wonderful opportunity for the Eagles to go out and get a super high caliber player that hopefully they'll never have to go out and get again.
Right. I mean, I have a feeling they might have to next year too, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent in this draft, especially up at the top, and you really can't go wrong at number 6 if they're going to stay there. I mean, I think I might entertain the possibility of maybe trading down a little bit if there's a quarterback there that maybe somebody really wants. Then go ahead and trade that pick, move down a couple spots, and you can still get that wide receiver or that corner or that tackle, what have you. But as it stands now, I'd be perfectly fine with staying at 6 and taking, like you said, Jamar Chase or Devonta Smith or whoever. You're going to get a good player there.
Now, a lot of people are seen to be, there's people who love Kyle Pitts. There's people who are like, we don't need another tight end. To me, I wouldn't mind it as long as he's used properly. I know that people are talking about the possibility of, the 2 tight end formations like the Patriots did with Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. I personally look at Pitts, physiology, and I see a guy who physically looks a little bit like Tony Gonzalez. He has that ability to have that kind of production. So how in are you on the idea of Kyle Pitts, and how do you think he would fit with the Eagles?
I think he would fit pretty well, but I'm not taking a tight end at 6. I'm sorry, I'm just not. We're not. If you have Dallas Goedert, who's supposedly going to be your number 1, yeah, I don't think you can take a back or not a backup, but a complimentary player that high in the draft. I think it was probably a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round that you could get that could fill that bill. I mean, Zach Ertz was a 2nd-round pick. He turned out, pretty well for the most part anyway. Dallas Goedert was a 2nd-round pick for that matter. So I think that they would be okay just waiting. I don't think I would. I mean, Kyle Pitts is certainly talented and has a high ceiling, but I don't think it's that high to go 6th overall.
If they did go offensively then, because you're saying not for Kyle Pitts, is there a guy, maybe one of the receivers, that you personally prefer more than the others?
That's a tough one. I would say Chase or Smith would be a tremendous addition to the both guys can stretch the field. Both guys can go get the football. You need somebody that can team with Jalen Reagor to complement him. I still think that he's got a pretty I think he still has a lot of potential as well. You really didn't get a chance to see it last year because of injuries, and the whole team was just a disaster eventually. So I would probably go with either one of those guys, Chaser or Smith, if he's there.
Dave Weinberg joining us here on Game Night for a Weinberg Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN. Each and every week he joins us on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. Follow him on Twitter at Dave Weinberg19. Also check out his extra point columns over at 973ESPN.com. Dave, staying with the football front, one of the things that's also interesting about as we get closer to the draft is I know a lot of people are wondering what the Eagles should or shouldn't do when it comes to things. I know the talk today is that there's reports that Brandon Graham could have his contract restructured, and there's a few other guys who could be restructured. How different do you think this roster could look when we get to training camp in August?
Potentially very different. I mean, they've kind of made it known that they're in a rebuilding mode here, so that means there are going to be some guys there who either make too much money or too old or simply probably don't want to be hanging around as part of a rebuilding project. I would think Jason Kelsey kind of fits that mold. I mean, he's getting up there. He's over 30 now. He's been hinting at retirement for a couple of years. So why would he want to stay around for 1, 2, 3 more years as part of a rebuilding team? I just don't see that happening as much as he loves the Eagles and the Eagles love him. Fletcher Cox might be that in the same boat. I mean, he's getting into the prime of his career now. I don't know why he would want to stick around for that kind of thing. Brandon Graham's kind of a little bit of a different story. He's kind of on the back 9 of his career, so to speak, to borrow a golf analogy. And he's endeared himself to the fans in Philadelphia, and I know he loves the town, and they love him too. So that from that standpoint, I can understand why he would want to stay. But some of those other guys, I don't know if the Eagles want them back at their current price or whether they want to come back.
You mentioned whether they want to come back or not. How much also is going to factor in the reality that, listen, some guys, they just might not be interested in going through, as we call it, either a retooling or rebuilding, whatever we want to call it, season. Maybe some of these guys are saying, look, I wanted to be here to win, and if you're not going to win, maybe you should find a new home for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much leverage they have, but it seems like I don't know if they have the leverage that Carson had to force a trade or what have you. But yeah, like I said, those guys are they're either their careers are either winding down and they only have like 1 or 2 more shots at this, or they're just coming into their prime and don't know how long this is going to take. So if you're a veteran, you really have to weigh, your future in Philadelphia as opposed to somewhere else where you might be in better position to pursue a championship again.
Dave Weinberg joining us, Weinberg Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN. Dave's also covered the sport of boxing. He's a Hall of Fame boxing writer for a long time. And I wanted to ask you also, before you'll move on to anything else, this story about Clarissa Shields and the pay-per-view this Friday to me is fascinating. I'm all for people, trying to find new and creative ways to, try to put themselves out there, have an opportunity to do what they love. But the fact that she had to go out and make her own pay-per-view to be able to make some of these fights work, I mean, what does that say about where the world is right now that someone of her profile is in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, she's really taking a risk here, and I have a feeling it's just not going to do very well. I mean, she's certainly, among the top, if not the top two or three women's boxers in the country or in the world, but I don't know how popular she really is with the boxing public. And I think Showtime kind of like played their hand a little bit by not showcasing her yet. I mean, she has that contract with Showtime, or she did, and she fought like 4 or 5, 6 times on that network, and I don't know what the ratings were, but I don't think they were spectacular. This is a real gamble on her part. I think she was just tired of waiting around, because now that it seems like Showtime doesn't have any big plans for her, or none of the other promotional companies either. So I guess she really had no choice but to pursue this.
When you think about also the fact that you just mentioned, where boxing is right now, why do you feel like boxing is where they are when it comes to women fighters? Because, for example, in MMA, women fighters are celebrated, they're promoted. Amanda Nunes, she's fighting this Saturday, and she's being promoted actually almost more than the main event. So why is it that MMA has treated female fighters different than boxing has?
That's a good question, Josh, and I really don't know the answer. I guess it seemed like women's boxing had a little bit of an upsurge. We're talking a few years now with Christy Martin, Layla Ali, but for whatever reason, that never seemed to develop any staying power. I don't know why that is. With Clarissa is certainly as talented, and she's as celebrated and accomplished as any women's boxer you can find. I mean, 2-time Olympian. Champion of 4 weight classes. Now she's got the chance to unify 2 of them. And I don't know what it is about the sport as far as women are concerned, but it just doesn't seem like it's all that popular. And why that is, I don't know. I don't know if it's a lack of marketing or whatever, publicity or what have you. But it's clearly, you're right. It's clearly not as popular as MMA. And maybe it's just a credit to Dana White and the UFC and the PFL. Well, actually, Clarissa's switching over to MMA later this year, fighting in the Professional Fighters League, although she's not going to stay there. But clearly she sees that as an opportunity to maybe improve her brand a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how she fares in the cage instead of the ring.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting because, when you look at, for example, PFL, what they're doing with the women's fighters, because they have people like, Kayla Harris in there and stuff like that, they're kind of following the model of what they had Heather Hardy do over in Bellator, which is Clarissa wants to keep boxing and she wants to be an MMA fighter. So I'm curious to see. I mean, no offense to Heather Hardy, but to me, Clarissa, her personality, her attitude when she's fighting, I feel like she has superstar written all over her. And it just feels like it's like this woman could be so much more if she would be given the platform to do that. And she even said that in the interview I saw recently with her. She said that she wants to be a multi-sport star.
Yeah, that's easier said than done, though, Josh. As you've seen boxers try to make that transition, and traditionally, very few of them have succeeded. She's going to find out that it's a lot different than what she's used to. I mean, you could go the route of Ray Mercer and just insist that it's going to be a whole stand-up, and she'd fare pretty well. But there's a lot more intricacies and technique and a lot of variety to fighting as an MMA fighter as opposed to a boxer. So I think it's going to take her a little. She certainly has a personality, like you said, natural athletic ability, but there's a lot more that goes into that, and I think she's going to find it to be a kind of a tough struggle.
Do you buy into it all on any level, the fact that she's been training with Holly Holm, who also made the transition from boxing to MMA?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt. Like you saw Kimbo Slice train with Bas Rutten, and that worked out pretty well for a little bit anyway. Yeah, it does help when you have somebody who knows what it takes to make that transition. I just don't know that. I don't know if she has. I don't think she has any background in wrestling or Muay Thai or kickboxing or anything. So I mean, when you're going in like raw like that, it's really difficult to get in, to gain a foothold and to make any headway in a sport that's so demanding and so different than boxing is.
He's Dave Weinberg. You can follow him on Twitter at DaveWeinberg19. Check out his extra point columns over at 973ESP.com. Also check out the podcast that is Tequila and Touchdowns with Dave Weinberg. He joins us every Wednesday. They chatted up here on Game Night, and as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Dave, always appreciate the time and the conversation.
Oh, thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Take care.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, text board is open at 609-403-0973. The chat on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter is off the wall right now. It is absolutely bonkers. So I got to get to some of your comments watching on the stream. Always Testy chimes in on the YouTube channel and says, I want to roll with Jalen Hurts this season. Hey, man, I'm with you. Let's see what the guy's got. Let him sink or swim. I'm not sitting here telling you if he's going to sink or swim. I want to see if he's going to sink or swim. That's what I want to see. I want to see him get that chance tonight. 609-403-0973. The text board. We're reading some comments from people watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at 973 ESPN. Watching the show Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. Going over to the Sixers, Kenneth chimes in and says, I like the way the Sixers announcer says Joel Embiid. Well, you can hear some of the fantastic announcing of Tom McGinnis tonight at 7 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Jay chimes in on the YouTube channel and says, Kyle Pitts and Goddard in the West Coast offense. Sirianni needs an offensive playmaker to grow with. Then you can draft all the defense and a center after that. And listen, I hear what you're saying, Jay. Listen, I'm not against drafting Kyle Pitts. It's just it wouldn't be my personal preference. But as I said to Mike Gill, I asked him earlier, how much do you guys think that they hired Brian Johnson from Florida to be the quarterback coach? How much do you think Johnson is being asked about Kyle Pitts? They're asking him, what's he like? How does he fit in? Would he fit in? What do you think? You know, Sirianni said multiple times in his introductory presser that I'm going to evaluate tape. I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we should or shouldn't do. Well, don't you think that maybe part of that tape evaluation is him calling up Brian Johnson or getting Brian Johnson into the film room with him and saying, talk to me about Kyle Pitts. Tell me how he fits this offense. Tell me what we can do with this guy. I think that can't be overlooked. I don't think it's a full coincidence that Brian Johnson is from Florida and Kyle Pitts is being connected by so many people to the Eagles at 6 overall. I also think it's a coincidence that Jalen Hurts can be the starter in 2021, and Brian Johnson has known Jalen Hurts since he was 4 years old. I don't think those things are coincidences. I think there is something to be said about that. And Jay, yes, I agree with you. He is a mismatch nightmare against anybody. Jay, as I played the cuts earlier, listen, here's the thing with Pitts. He's a weapon, okay, as Jay mentions. You know, to me, Kyle Pitts is not a tight end. He's an offensive weapon. That's how I personally look at him. And I'm with you. If they draft Pitts, you're going to be happy, all right? I don't think this guy has any bust potential written all over him at all. I think that he is a guy who can be a bona fide star talent in this league. And I think that, you know, people have their opinions about him. I know people wonder, you know, can he be what he is outside the Florida offense? I know some people wonder about how does he fit in certain systems. Well, listen, all you need is the right team to draft him, the right system to grab a hold of him, and you can be pretty darn good. More people watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at 973 ESPN. Now we got another opinion over here by Paul watching on Facebook. Paul says, need to solidify the secondary. Surtain. Paul says Surtain is a must in the draft. And listen, Paul, I hear you. Listen, that's who I would go with. Nothing against Kyle Pitts. I'm just worried about the secondary. To me, the Eagles had so much success when they had good corners. You know, it was Lito and Sheldon. It was Bobby and Troy. Even when they won the Super Bowl, that was arguably the best that you could get out of Ronald Darby before his body broke down and the best you got out of Jalen Mills before his injuries piled up. To me, you draft Surtain, you let him grow with the defense, you know what he's capable of, you know his pedigree. I agree with you. but I'm not going to dismiss the idea of drafting Kyle Pitts. I love Patrick Surtain II. I think that he is a phenomenal talent. I think that, listen, I remember it was Tony Pauline who told us here on Game Night, who covers the NFL draft. He himself said, listen, man, this guy has a chance to be a 10-year bona fide all-pro, Pro Bowl level player in this league. It might take him a year or two to get to that level, but he's got that talent. I know somebody like Andrew DiCecco. He likes Surtain, but doesn't like him as much as 6 overall. So it kind of depends on personal preference, all right? You know, personal preference has a lot to do with some of this stuff. So, listen, Pitts, Surtain, Chase, I'd be good with any three of those guys personally. I think that you just have to make sure that if you're in a position to draft a blue chip caliber player, you don't want to swing and miss. And that's a lot of what I feel like about that. Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Love the conversation from all you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter here watching 97.3 ESPN. Stay tuned to the show as we got Kevin McCormick live from the center coming up next. Tobias Harris, it looks like he's playing tonight. What does that mean for the Sixers versus the Jazz? One in the East versus one in the West, right here on 97.3 ESPN FM. 7 o'clock starts the coverage with Tom McGinnis on the call. Of course, coming up, don't forget my FanDuel Sportsbook pick of the night as well here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City for all your Sixers, Flyers, Phillies, Eagles, and high school sports coverage here in South Jersey, all on the website 973ESPN.com and the 973 ESPN mobile app. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch the show live. Josh Hennig here in the Matt Black Kia Studios on 97.3 ESPN.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, we're here every night getting you ready for all the action every single night. And of course, tonight on 97.3 ESPN, we're being joined by Kevin McCormick. He's going to join us coming up next here on 97.3 ESPN. You can see him live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You get your way for Sixers basketball tonight. Sixers pregame coverage being brought to you by Trifecta Therapeutics in Glassboro, South Jersey's premier sports rehabilitation and physical therapy center, treating the pros and the Joes. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com. Yes, Kevin McCormick live on the stream, joining us here on 97.3 ESPN. Now, Kevin, let's describe the scene a little bit for you. So, really quick before we get to the game itself, it looks like you are seated in a different spot than in the past that guys like you, Paul, and Blevins have been in. So where are you seated today for the game?
Well, we're still in our usual seating. I actually they have these nice little tables out on the concourse for people to kind of, have a quieter workspace or to eat a meal real fast when they get here before they go out to their table on the lower bowl. So I stepped out just so you guys don't hear the echo of the music playing from the DJ and such.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, because I know that with fans coming back into the building, it's obviously going to change where they place you guys in the building. I know Kevin Dursa was telling us the other night that they're already putting them up in the press box in preparation for the fans returning. So I was just wondering if maybe how soon they're going to start doing that for you guys. But it seems like at least for one more game, you guys get a little bit extra of the suite access.
Yeah, for now we're still spoiled in our A+ seats on the lower bowl.
Nice. Well, listen, nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. He's Kevin McCormick, of course. Follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973 here as one of our Sixers beat guys. All the Sixers coverage over at 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, Kevin. Starters include Tobias Harris. He is back. It's really interesting because on one hand, it's great that he's back. But on the other hand, it's kind of like maybe he could have waited one extra game, got to the All-Star break, got a little extra healthy. But, you can't tell a competitive guy like Tobias Harris just to sit around and do nothing.
Yeah, I'm very indifferent about the decision. Once he went down in the Mavericks game, I was just kind of like, all right, shut him down for these last 3 games. Because this is a guy in Tobias Harris who's been out there every night playing big minutes for this team. I think using those 3 extra games to just give him a little bit of extra time to get off his feet and help him just feel a little more refreshed heading into the second half of the season would have been great. But like you said, Tobias is a workhorse. He's a leader on and off the floor. He wants to lead by example. He wants to be out there helping lead this team, especially in a game like tonight where they're playing a Utah Jazz team who's still playing great basketball and the top seed in the Western Conference.
Now, you mentioned about the Jazz. Obviously, this can be considered now a measuring stick game for the Sixers. One in the East, one in the West. Sixers have all their guys. The Jazz have all their guys in the starting lineup. How do you feel like the Sixers match up versus the Jazz, considering the last time they played them, there was no Embiid. The team looked different. Simmons went out at that huge game. Tobias had a huge game. But there was no Embiid. So aside from the obvious, what is the biggest difference going into this game tonight as the Sixers run it back with the Jazz?
The biggest thing I would say is, who is Rudy Gobert going to defend when the Sixers are on offense? Obviously, you could say the first option could be Embiid, or maybe they try and use Gobert as like a patrol man under the rim and try and negate Simmons, even though it didn't work the first time. So I'm very interested to see how that goes because, yes, Ben Simmons had a career night the first time these teams faced off. But like we said, Joel Embiid was not in the lineup, and he kind of was allowed to get downhill more and expose that mismatch with Rudy Gobert. So if they go with a smaller defender like an Ingles or a Bogdanovich on him, I'm very interested to see if that's a mismatch that Ben Simmons can continue to exploit, or maybe even if Doc Rivers tries a lot of Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid pick and roll, because maybe he wants to continue that attacking of Ben Simmons or Rudy Gobert around the rim. So that's kind of a little battle within the game that I have circled so far heading in.
Another battle within the game I'm interested in is how do these coaches handle the rotations? Because, people know about the Jazz's starters, but outside of Clarkson, the Jazz don't have a ton of depth on the bench, right? Obviously O'Neal, he's an okay player. He's not something special to write home about. Clarkson's probably a 6-man candidate, but how do the coaches handle the benches? Because the Sixers, it's been hit or miss. The Jazz, they don't have a great bench.
It's going to be interesting because, like you said, obviously with Joel Embiid was a big name that wasn't in the game the first time these two teams faced off, but the Jazz were also without Mike Conley, who's a starter for them and has been kind of in the All-Star conversation. So, like you said, Royce O'Neal is most likely a guy that's going to come off the bench tonight. Shake Milton will be in the game for the Sixers, which is big because the bench disparity was a key factor that led to Utah winning that game. Jordan Clarkson himself outscored the entire Sixers bench unit by scoring 40 points that night. So the rotations are going to be interesting. It's going to be fun to see if these two coaches ride their stars just because they're heading into the All-Star break and they're going to have a week off to prep. So I would say the rotations are a big thing to watch, but more importantly, just with that Utah rotation, even though they're weak off the bench, Jordan Clarkson has just been phenomenal in that 6-man role. So containing him when the second unit are out on the floor is still a major thing to watch, even though Utah might not be as deep of a team.
Kevin McCormick joining us here live from the Wells Fargo Center here on 97.3 ESPN. Sixers versus the Jazz coming up at the top of the hour. Tom McGinnis on the call right here on 97.3 ESPN. Obviously, Kevin, this is the Sixers' final game before the All-Star break. So there's an opportunity for them to hit the reset button. What is the biggest thing the Sixers need to hit the reset button with in terms of how they've played in the first half?
I think the biggest thing that could really use a reset button is the second unit. Although they played great in that win against Indiana, these past few weeks have been a real struggle for them with, just creating offense and guys getting hot and cold at random times. So I think them just getting a week off their feet and the big picture, I think just hitting the reset button in general, just having this group be able to time to kind of look back on how this first half of the season's gone, address what they need to fix. Everybody kind of gets that breath of fresh air. They're able to kind of stretch their legs and relax without playing every other night. And then you get to come into the second half of the season and continue to just keep things rolling to try and keep that top spot in the Eastern Conference. Because I feel like one thing that isn't talked about enough is with this, rugged schedule of playing almost every other day, this team doesn't really get to practice. And this is a Sixers team that had a lot of turnover within the roster. So I think now that this group has such a large sample size to work with, Doc Rivers is going to be in the lab all week during this break, figuring out what he needs to adjust, seeing the pros and cons of how this first half of the season went, and working towards adjusting those for the second leg.
When you think about that bench as well, I know a lot of people talk about who they should trade for. I've heard Lou Williams starting to creep up as a name. Kyle Lowry's out there. George Hill has been mentioned, Alon Wright. For the Sixers, what is more important for them? Is it more important for them to get guys who are coming off the bench or to find a starter who bumps somebody onto the bench?
I would say it's more important to go get a bench piece, just because when you look at the Sixers team as a whole and their strengths and weaknesses, none of their real weaknesses come within the starting lineup. So I've still been in the camp of, if you're going to acquire pieces, it should be continue to upgrade your weaknesses, not try and throw a wrench into a good thing that's been working well. So if you can go get a veteran guard who's more of a pure point guard, who can come in, who can run an offense when Ben Simmons is off the floor and really help Shake Milton embrace his combo guard play style and let him score on all three levels. And then if you can go get a stretch big, Mike Scott was phenomenal in the win against Indiana. He seems to be really picking it up. But I think if a guy like PJ Tucker really becomes available and he's a guy you can go and get, then you definitely go and get him.
Would you rather keep Mike Scott or would you rather get PJ Tucker?
I would rather get PJ Tucker. I think, although Mike Scott is a nice player in himself, I think PJ Tucker really fits the identity of this team. He's just a gritty defender who's really made his career on that end of the ball. So I think he's going to be a guy who comes in and really embraces the defensive identity that this team's built through the first half of the season. And he's also a very solid three-point shooter. So he's a guy you could throw out there. He could play next to Dwight Howard in that second unit and be a guy who spots up in the corner and knocks down threes. And he also gives you the potential of a small ball five option that he's done a little bit for Houston in the past. So those nights where the Ben Simmons, Dwight Howard pairing isn't going well, you could throw PJ Tucker out there and, he'll be able to defend a little bit with bigger guys, but also open up the floor for a guy like Simmons to attack the rim.
Ken McCormick joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline here on 97.3 ESPN live from the Wells Fargo Center. Sixers playing tonight versus the Jazz here on 97.3 ESPN. You mentioned Dwight Howard. Obviously, he's been a big part of this team thus far. What do you think is his role going to be moving forward? Because obviously when you go into the playoffs, you got very specific matchups you got to prepare for in the postseason. And teams like, for example, the Nets, they don't really have a center. They don't really have a big man you would go against. So how do you think Dwight Howard's role might change as we get approached to and in the postseason?
I could see it shrinking a little bit, and it could also maybe become matchup dependent, sort of like how it did for him with the Lakers last season, where sometimes he was a starter, sometimes he was getting minimal minutes just because they were going off the team they were facing. So when the playoffs come around, you should expect Joel Embiid to see a minutes bump. So obviously his role is going to decrease there. But if they're playing a smaller team who kind of has more of a smaller bench unit and embraces that small ball in the second unit, maybe you don't see Dwight Howard as much and you try to combat it. But I think it will really depend on how this roster looks heading into the postseason and will very heavily depend on who they're facing in said matchup.
I want to play you something that Paul Hudrick said earlier today on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill. They were talking about the possibility of the Kyle Lowry situation. If they trade for him, shouldn't they trade for him? Obviously, it's been a conversation we all have had. This was Hudrick on best and worst case scenarios. Take a listen.
The best case scenario is you make this move and you win a championship and then you re-sign Kyle Lowry. That's the obvious best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you make this move, you don't win a championship, and you don't re-sign Kyle Lowry. If that's the case, you still have Joel Embiid, you still have Ben Simmons, you still have Tobias Harris, and then you have Daryl Morey with some cap space.
I love the part at the end where it says Daryl Morey with cap space. I think we forget sometimes that this is not a one-and-done thing. This is they want to win multiple times. They don't want to just run at it once and then never run at it again.
I agree a lot with what Paul said. Kyle Lowry, if you can bring him in, definitely is a major upgrade. He's a guy who's won a championship. He's a gritty defender. He's a pest. He's going to get in guys' heads during the postseason, which definitely could bring value. But the only thing that really worries me with that trade is how much you have to give up player-wise from a monetary standpoint just to match salaries to acquire him. So my only real downside to acquiring Lowry is you're really rolling the dice in terms of what you'll have left to fill out this roster, because with giving up all those contracts at the end of the bench, you're really banking on a player becoming available who fits right into that trade exception from the Al Horford deal, which is around $8.1 million, which is a reasonable amount, and you could get a decent player in that price range, and the buyout market, which, as we know, could be any players around the league. So I don't know if I'm fully on board of the idea of going all in for Lowry and then rolling the dice of hopefully being able to fill out this bench, because having a deep rotation is going to be crucial if this team wants to go to the finals. And whether or not you trade for Lowry, Daryl Morey is still going to have that cap space at the end of the year. Danny Green's an expiring contract. Mike Scott, Terrence Ferguson, Tony Bradley, whether you use them all for Lowry or they're still here, Daryl Morey is most likely going to have that cap space no matter what heading into this offseason.
He's Kevin McCormick. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. Covers the Sixers for 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out all of his coverage on the website and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, great stuff. Enjoy the game tonight, and we'll catch you soon.
All right, thanks a lot, Josh. Have a good night, man.
And, of course, our Sixers pregame coverage being brought to you by Trifecta Therapeutics in Glassboro, South Jersey's premier sports rehabilitation and physical therapy center, treating the pros and the Joes. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com. Josh Hennig here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN. As promised, FanDuel Sportsbook pick of the night coming up here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, don't forget, promo code Hennig when you set up with FanDuel Sportsbook to get same-game parlay insurance. If one leg of your same-game parlay falls short, you can get up to $25 back in site credit every day with FanDuel Sportsbook. But you got to use the promo code Hennig when you sign up, HENNIG. All right, a couple interesting picks I want to hit on here before we get out of here. The Atlanta Hawks are currently -2.5 at Orlando. I know they're without Cam Reddish, but the Orlando Magic are on a pretty significant home losing streak. And overall, they've actually lost 4 straight games. So I like the Hawks to cover. You know, the Magic, they just don't play great defense right now, and I think the Hawks can light them up. The other pick I'm keeping an eye on here is last night we saw that almost every team in the NBA covered the spread who are underdogs. And tonight the Trailblazers are +2 at home. They're healthier than they've been in a long time. They're at home versus the Warriors. +2 is a very small number, and the odds makers put it at -114, which means that it's pretty much close to a coin flip game. Josh Hennig, Game Night. Catch you tomorrow.